in the thick of everything that's been happening. And I would love, do you hear a little feedback?
I
Maybe I
do
need,
not.
no. Okay, good. So I would love to just have you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about uh, what it's looked like on in Congress the last few days as you've been negotiating. And I'm glad to see you're back in Rhode Island and staying safe.
Well, thank you, Amy. It's great to be with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you and hopefully your future constituents what's happening in Washington. So we just passed yesterday the fourth relief package. This was an emergency relief package, which I want to talk a little bit about. But this is the fourth bill that we've done in a very bipartisan way, and we've tried to really work collaboratively because we think it's important for the country to see us working together. But this emergency relief package came to be because Senator McConnell basically came to the House and said, I want $250 billion to refill the payroll protection program. This is the program that we created to help small businesses, and it had run out of money very quickly, which I think
Yeah.
shows what the need is. But we wanted to institute some important reforms to the program to make certain it was reaching the actual small businesses we intended it to reach, the kind of mom and pop operations, the 1 and 2 person coffee shops, barber shops, salons. What we saw when the PPP was implemented was that the banks were giving preferential treatment to their best customers, their biggest customers. And so those who had a long-standing banking relationship, maybe had a line of credit with the bank, and some of the biggest corporations that were eligible were getting big loans, while a lot of the smaller small businesses were at the end of the line. And so we
Right.
really wanted to insist on some reforms to this to make sure we were helping the small businesses in New Jersey and Rhode Island and all across the country. The Republicans in the Senate refused to make any changes, and they said they simply wanted to add $250 billion. We said, look, at the very least, we want to be sure that we set aside some portion of that money, and we were successful in setting aside $60 billion for community-based lenders to really focus on women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, veterans-owned businesses, and those that are really don't have a long banking relationship, the small businesses.
Right.
And then we added another $110 billion for disaster loan and disaster grant programs, again, really targeted at the very small businesses. So we were successful in kind of forcing that into the bill, although the Republicans resisted it every step of the way. We had a total of $380 billion in new money for small business. That is for the PPP program as well as the set asides. We also insisted that we provide some relief for our hospitals and particularly for our healthcare providers that are still struggling to get PPE protective equipment.
Yes.
And they resisted that. McConnell kept saying, just the 250 billion, the same way it was. This has already been agreed to. We finally convinced him to agree to the $75 billion for hospitals and PPE. And finally, we insisted that since developing a national testing strategy is so key to beating this pandemic and really getting the economy reopened, and the administration has really been unwilling to do that, we included a provision in here that requires the administration to develop a national testing strategy, and we allocated $25 billion for that purpose. And what was funny is during the debate, the Republicans criticized us for the delay that they claim we created. The delay was created because the Republicans refused to agree to money for hospitals and for testing. And then they were on the floor praising how wonderful it was that the bill they were voting on included help for hospitals and money for testing, which was the things we fought for. But so we got those in this emergency measure, but we're also in the middle of preparing the CARES 2, the second big stimulus and recovery package. And in that, we're really committed to making sure we, of course, help small business, of course, help families, of course, extend unemployment. I think have additional direct cash payments, make certain that we're providing hazard pay or supplemental pay for our first responders and those working in the hospitals and our CNAs and nurses. So we have a lot more to do. We have really just begun, I think, to understand the devastating economic consequences of this pandemic. And we hope in the very short period of time to have that second bill done, or actually what will be the fifth bill, and then bring that to the floor.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point that this is probably a long road ahead. And with the pushback you've seen even on simple things like testing, I applaud that it has been a bipartisan effort, but if you're getting pushback on things like testing, how do foresee some of the challenges coming up when it comes to maybe not direct but mental health supports that are going to be needed? And what else do you anticipate the needs to be for the fifth?
Yeah, I mean, there are very substantial mental health needs. I mean, for folks who are struggling with mental health issues to begin with, to go through an extended period of isolation and anxiety, and people having kind of the twin fear of economic devastation and then a fear that someone in their family or they themselves may get ill and die. I mean, so it's like the combination of these two things are really, almost too much for everyone, and let alone folks who may be struggling with some mental health issues to begin with. So we've got to invest in that in a very, very serious way. I think we have to understand that it's this reopening of the government is going to take some time, and it's not going to happen in a flick of a switch. It's going to be gradual. We need to, most importantly, make sure that we are devoting the resources and attention to defeating the pandemic. You can't defeat this virus and reopen the economy until you do so. And one of
Right.
the great frustrations I've had, many of us have had, is the unwillingness of this president and this administration to take on the responsibility of making certain that every state has the equipment, the
Yeah.
ventilators, the masks, the PPEs that they need to combat this virus. The president has the authority under the Defense Production Act, which no one else has. Congress doesn't have that authority. No other person does. He is the only one who can invoke it to massively produce or direct the production of all the things we need, and then create a federal regional distribution system. So
Right.
we have both the production that's necessary and then it's being distributed in a rational way to the places it's needed. The president refuses to take on that responsibility. Instead, he said, it's up to the governors. And so you have states like New Jersey and Rhode Island that governors are on the phone, members of the congressional delegation on the phone trying to find vendors, find masks, find PPE. The prices are going up because they're
Right.
price gouging because of the competition. This is no way to manage a public health crisis. But the president has really been unwilling to do that. We have legislation that will force him to do it in an effort to try to get him to do it.
Yeah.
But it's a terrible way to manage this, to require states to figure out how they're going to independently compete with each other to get what they need for their states, and that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, I know I've heard a lot about the PPE, and I reached out to Medline, who makes a lot of the equipment, and they kind of echoed what you're saying in the sense that it is challenging when there's different customers that they've always had, who are requesting, and then FEMA is requesting, and really knowing where it should end up. And having the president, I think, run that and make sure that it's being allocated appropriately
Right.
would have been helpful. But I think we're going to see some challenging times here in New Jersey, where we've really been a hot spot and had a lot of incidents and cases here with the testing. We've expanded it in all of the counties, but people are still, if they're not symptomatic, they're not tested yet, and we know that that can be an issue. And there's talk of reopening in other states. So what do you think we need to be doing before we make that the, mantra, talking
Yeah.
about
Look,
reopening?
yeah, I think everyone wants, of course, the economy to reopen as quickly as we can to get back to our lives and get, people back to work. But we can only do that once it's safe to do it. And the truth is, every public expert has said, every single person who has spoken about this has said, look, you have to have wide scale testing all across the country, millions and millions of people, so you know who's been exposed to the virus, who has the virus, who has the antibodies, so you can isolate the people who are sick from others so they won't infect others. So you cannot begin to think in a serious way about reopening places until you have national testing in place so we actually know who's sick and who's not. And the idea of reopening before that happens makes no sense. It will create the likelihood that we'll have a second wave, which could be even worse. And the reality is, if you open restaurants today in New Jersey or in Rhode Island, folks are not going to go to them. because they're
Right.
not going to have confidence that it's safe to do that yet because of the lack of testing. And what's really frustrating to me is the president says at almost every chance he's asked about testing, he says, everyone who needs a test, everyone who wants a test can have one. That is just not true.
Right.
Governors from both parties have said we do not have enough tests. We can't get enough testing kits or testing machines. And again, this is an area where if the president invoked the authority of the Defense Production Act, he could make certain that we were massively producing what we need to keep the American people safe. And we're going to keep calling on him to do it. Hopefully, the legislation we passed yesterday will put some pressure on him. But I think we have to take our responsibility of keeping people safe and
Yeah.
alive and healthy first before we can think about reopening our economic activity.
Do you see any opportunities here? In obviously, this has exposed a lot of uh, underlying issues with our healthcare system and the health disparities that we're seeing. Do you think that there's an opportunity moving forward? And where do you see signs of hope in terms of as we're, you know, passing relief and stimulus that we could maybe do something different and move us forward on those?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I mean, what this pandemic has revealed for the whole country to see
Yeah.
is the grotesque inequality in our country, income inequality, the grotesque health disparities based on race, the this incredible housing inequality as people who are homeless are battling this pandemic and people struggling to stay in their homes. So I hope, and I think we're already starting to see it, that in addition to being very active and having a robust relief package that responds to these needs quickly and urgently, that we will also use this as an opportunity to really move forward with some structural changes in our economy to make sure people are not living on the edge. I mean, what really struck me was the number of Americans who literally could not go without a paycheck for a week or two.
Yeah.
Growing up, we were always taught, save for 6 months or 3 months, have it in the bank. The reality is that's impossible today. And so
Right.
folks were just in the worst kind of condition if they missed a single paycheck, let alone two. And even small businesses couldn't survive without a month or two of business. That shows you how fragile the economic condition is for so many Americans, people living on the edge. Something is wrong. And I hope this will be it will be a call to action for us to really think about structural change that will rebuild the middle class of this country and provide real security for people so that we will never have this kind of economic unease and terror in the lives of American families ever again.
I think you're right. As a former public school teacher, I've watched how educators across the country have really stepped up to try and provide um, all of those lessons to kids while they're at home. And yet it also points out how, uh, there isn't access for everybody to internet services and how that can really impact those students, as well as when there might be English as a second language. And so many older siblings are the ones that are stepping up to help their younger siblings with those lessons. And what might come out of this for increasing access to those services, and also in backing our teachers and being able to say, you did this work, and we're so accessible. What I found with my own kids is that their teachers have been on call, not only doing the online lesson, but sending emails and asking if we're okay, and if we need to vent, please let them know. If the kids are feeling sad, they'll do a Zoom with just one-on-one or the whole class. Trying after hours anytime.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. It's revealed this incredible digital divide that exists in our country, and something when you think about the infrastructure that's necessary to learn and succeed in the 21st century, we're going to have to devote a lot of resources to that. But you are absolutely right, and thank you again for your career as a teacher. This is a time where I think parents have developed a new appreciation for what it means to be a teacher because of the role that parents are playing to get their kids online and make sure they're doing this work. And I'll tell you, the experience here in Rhode Island has been amazing. The teachers have been extraordinary, and it was a transition overnight to online classes.
That's right.
But they've done it miraculously, and it's because they're dedicated to the kids, and they're in that career because they believe in learning and education.
Yeah.
And we, I think, will leave this pandemic with a new, deeper appreciation of how important and valued our teachers are.
So I've got another question for you that is really the viewers on the side here talking about how there was a suggestion that states should just go bankrupt. And, in a state like New Jersey or New York, where we've been hard hit, just if you could comment on that and why that really
Yeah.
was.
I mean, it's so deeply offensive. First of all, I mean, the really offensive part is to first say states like New Jersey and New York are net revenue generators for the federal government. They produce much more in federal income taxes than they receive. Unlike Kentucky, where the declarant of that statement, Senator McConnell, comes from, that's a donor state that gets much more in federal money than it generates. So the nerve of Senator McConnell to say go bankrupt. But what he was really saying is, sort of thumbing his nose at police officers and firefighters and teachers and sanitation workers. And in many parts of our country, our hospitals are run by county governments. And so it means nurses and doctors and CNAs that are on the front lines of this pandemic. And to say that states and cities don't need financial support to get through this pandemic is both misunderstanding the fundamental nature of the way government works and is deeply offensive to those heroes that are on the front lines, that are out there responding to emergencies, transporting people to the hospital, taking care of them, taking care of our young people. And it's like the idea that you think it's funny or clever to say, let them go bankrupt, when these are the heroes that are getting us through this pandemic. And I'll tell you, we feel on the Democratic caucus, it was the biggest disagreement in this emergency package is the Republicans refused to provide any additional support to state and local governments. And we couldn't get them to move on that, but we absolutely have to insist that that is in this next relief package, because we will be doing a disservice to our communities. Imagine what it will be like when there are hospitals that are contemplating laying people off because they don't have, the county government doesn't have the resources and the tax revenue coming in to lay healthcare professionals off in the middle of a pandemic, or our police or fire departments that are picking up people and transporting them very, very ill to hospitals and the rescues. The idea that they might be laid off because the state and local governments don't have the resources is unforgivable. And we have to really demand the Republicans recognize that. When they say state and local government, it sounds like some bureaucracy. What it really is the heroes on the front lines of this pandemic.
That's right. So, let's fast forward. Here in New Jersey, we have a primary July 7th. What do you think for primaries and things going forward will be the process to, still carry out a democratic process, but also observe kind of the guidelines for whatever social distancing, or do we need to do all vote by mail? Or is that something you see coming in another relief bill, some funding for that?
I think the Democratic caucus feels very strongly that no matter what kind of situation our country is in, we want to be certain that people have the right to vote and have their vote counted. And so I think the best approach is to have a number of different ways that people have an opportunity to vote by mail, which is easiest for most. That should be available to everyone. Early voting should be available to everyone. There are some people who like to go in person. If they can develop a system to do that safely, fine. But we should figure out every way that we can to make certain people can vote. I'm afraid the president, in maybe a kind of one moment of truthfulness, said we could never have all vote by mail. Republicans would never win an election, which is sort of an acknowledgement that if people get to vote, Democrats would likely win. But we ought to want everyone who's eligible to vote. And so it's one of the reasons we have to support the post office, because if we're going to have vote by mail, we need to have a functioning post office. And so we just have to be sure that we protect our democracy, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. I hope you agree that we have to preserve the right of people to have their voices heard in this democracy and make certain we protect our elections. And what we saw in Wisconsin, when people were denied the right to vote by mail and had to go in line and vote, there were at least 7 cases of people who contracted the coronavirus. That is unforgivable. I mean, that is criminal in my mind, that you would make people choose between their own health and their right to have their voices heard in our democracy. That's just not a choice anyone should be required to make.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We are seeing here yesterday in Atlanta County, there was a food bank with a really large turnout. The day before, they had one in all parts of the district. We're seeing that. And yet, on the other side of it, we're hearing farmers, because we have a really big agricultural land in New Jersey, we're hearing farmers that maybe are concerned about whether or not food will just rot on the vine. And do you see any relief for farmers and for those who are going hungry? And what do we do there to kind of make sure that there's safe working conditions for farms, but also getting the food to the people who need it?
Yeah, I mean the two things we tried very hard in this interim emergency relief package to get a substantial increase in the SNAP program because
Yeah.
the need, because of the decline in employment, the kind of economic conditions that folks are confronting, there's a lot of food insecurity, and so we tried really hard to get an increase in the SNAP benefits so that people would have access to food. That would obviously help our farmers. Our Republican colleagues refused to do that. The one thing we were able to get is a change to the payroll protection program that will now allow farmers to access that program. So the
Okay.
new money we allocated under PPP, farmers can, and that is a program where you borrow the money, you keep your employees on the payroll. As long as you bring them back, that loan that was originally given to keep them on the payroll turns into a grant. So it's a very generous program that will allow folks to keep their employees on the payroll, and now farmers are eligible. So, but we've got to help connect farmers also to food banks during the crisis because the demand is there. It's just farms don't necessarily have a way to get it to families that are in need, but working through food banks and figuring out how you connect the two is really key.
Oh, I think that's great. I'm glad to hear that they're part of this PPP program. And, you know, we all want to get on to summer and tourism and all of the other parts that, I know Rhode Island and New Jersey share that great summer influx of visitors. But I'm trying to imagine what that will look like in restaurants and, for us, casinos and the beach, just being on the beaches, and how we do that safely. And what, it'll be difficult, I think, even for the real estate market with rentals that are not able to be rented, or
Yeah.
families just not even having the resources to consider taking a summer break. So, do you see that there's going to be, are we seeing where that might be possible? Are we thinking about summer, or is it we
I
just have
think yeah, it's a question on the minds of a lot of Rhode Islanders, and I'm sure folks in New Jersey too, because summer is such a special time. I think it's going to depend a lot on the status of the pandemic, and I think we're going to experience this summer in a different way than past summers. So I think you'll see. It wouldn't surprise me to see governors stagger when people can go to the beach. People who maybe have a last name A through F on this day, and kind of just to be sure that the beaches aren't crowded, so there could be social distancing.
yeah.
But it's important because you're right. A lot of folks are suffering economically, and so those free places like the parks and the beaches that folks can go to are really important. But again, I think the advice is we're going to have to listen to the public health experts. They're going to tell us when it's safe and how to do it, and I think we just have to really defer to them.
Thank you. I saw one of our mutual friends on here, Bill Emmett, so we'll give him a little shout out.
Hey, Bill.
And in that vein, I'll ask you, we've seen some expansion of telehealth during this time, and I'm grateful for that. I'm glad that people have been able to access that. I think the need's going to continue. And can you think of any other, I know we did talk about, being able to highlight bright spots, but for me, this time with my family has been really special. Have there been any bright spots for you in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's caused everyone to sort of pause their life. I mean, even though you're working in a different way. And, we've had some great examples of people doing extraordinary things in restaurants, delivering food to homeless shelters, and, just examples of people really reaching out and kind of taking care of each other, which has
Yeah.
been wonderful. We
Yeah.
do a family Zoom in my family every Wednesday night and Sunday afternoons with everyone, all my nieces and nephews, and my mother gets to see all of her children and grandchildren. And we actually don't do that, we talk and we visit, but not as a group like that. So that's
Yeah.
been kind of cool. Everyone sort of, but when you know the kind of hurt and pain that so many families are in that have lost someone or someone is ill, it's hard to think of this in any other way than just a devastating crisis. But I do think we're seeing some things that will have some long-term benefits in terms of telehealth, online learning. I mean, I think there are some things that we're going to learn to use in a non-pandemic period in an effective way, and that's good.
I think that's right. So, I promised I'm only going to keep you for a short time tonight. So I want to let you go. I want to just ask one more question. Everybody watches what it looks like in person when you're going to do a vote like this. Give us just the image. What was that like yesterday when you have to still go by social distancing? And what did it actually look like going to DC to take this vote when you've been working?
Yeah, it was a very, very eerie feeling, to be honest. When you work in an organization, you develop real friendships, and I have friendships with both Republicans and Democrats. But you work closely with your colleagues, and we've been away for 3 weeks, so you're going back, and then you realize you can't actually interact with your colleagues the way you normally would. You can't shake their hand, you can't give them a hug, you have to remain 6 feet away. You're wearing a mask, they're wearing a mask. In the chamber, all of the seats were blocked. So if there were 8 seats, one was available to be, you could sit on, the other had a piece of paper on it from the sergeant at arms saying, "Do not sit here," to be sure that people were spaced out. We came in to vote, and then we had to exit a different door. So it was a very
Yeah,
ominous kind of feeling. We knew we had
sure.
to do it. It was important. But you realize that kind of give and take in the legislative process and the ability to communicate with each other is so central to your work. When
Yeah.
that's removed out, but I will say, since you're going to give me my last minute, I cannot get off this without first saying thank you for inviting me, but also to all the people who are on, how important it is that we elect Amy Kennedy to the Congress of the United States. Because in this moment, seriously, we have revealed what Democrats are fighting for, and we're fighting to save lives, to support families, small business, and workers, to support our communities in every way we can. And we're seeing, kind of laid out what I see as the gross incompetence of this administration in responding to this epidemic, and an unwillingness of our Republican colleagues to really confront this challenge with the kind of resources that are comprehensive, that really deal with the economic anxiety of the American people. You as an educator know firsthand what the implications are for education. You as a mom know what it is for families, and we need your voice and your passion and your vision in the Congress of the United States. So I
Thank
look
you
forward to
so
welcoming
much.
you.
I so appreciate it. I'm so grateful for your service. You've been a real leader for so many people, and you're doing such a good job that my husband could not stay out of the room. I kept, you saw me
Those are
looking off to
big
the side.
shoes to fill. I'm still trying to fill them.
Oh, he loves you, David. You know that.
I love you both.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
My
Take
pleasure.
care.
Take care.
Thank you.